Welcome to the Tales of a Gearhead podcast. I'm your host, Stacey David. This podcast is brought to you by LMC Truck. Keep them on the road is their slogan, and they supply the parts to help you do that. Also, Cornwell Tools, the choice of professionals and hot rods and enthusiasts alike. If you want quality tools, Cornwell's the place to go. Let's get to it. All right. Last week we talked about the levels of projects that people might run into when they're out there. And it's an important thing because people need to know what level of project they're getting into so they know what to expect. If you just jump into a project and you don't know what's involved in doing that project to the level you want to do it, you are going to have problems. And nobody has really done that. So what we've done, we've came up with a series called Stacey David's Restoration Series. It's on Amazon Prime. Make sure you check that out along with all the shows of gears that are on there now. The first show, we go through the 5 levels of project. On the last podcast, I dealt with the level 1, which is the get it running and driving project. Today, we're going to deal with the level 2, which is the cosmetic and mechanical restoration. Now, one thing that people ask about these levels, they're like, well, so it's probably based on how much money you spend, right? No, it's not how much money you spend. It's not how much time you spend on it. It's not how many cool little gewgaws you've put on your project. I have based these on the type of tools that you're going to need and the skills that you're going to need to pull these off. So that's what my levels are based on. Because if you don't have the skills and you don't have the tools, you don't need to be stepping into a level that you're not able to do. That's going to be problems, and you're going to get so frustrated with the project and you're going to end up selling it and losing money on it. We don't want that to happen. We want you to enjoy your project. So let's get to the level 2, the cosmetic and mechanical restoration. Now, this is basically fixing or restoring a vehicle back to original condition with upgrades. And that with upgrades is where it gets into kind of a gray area, but we'll talk about that a little bit. Now, if you get a vehicle and you want to go through it, that's what we're talking about here. This level 2 cosmetic and mechanical restoration is a great learning ground to get on up to the higher levels. So don't skip this step. This is something a lot of people live in this step. For example, years ago, right out of high school, I bought a '65 Mustang Fastback, and I went up there and bought it and drove it back, and it had a lot of problems. The paint was iffy, but it was a good running car. So I spent the first, few years on it, just getting it running well and, swapping things here and there and this and that. So that was a level 1. Then I decided to take it to a level 2. I decided I was going to paint it. I decided I was going to do the interior. And I decided I needed a lot more horsepower into the hood. So I pulled out the 289, put in a 302, learned about building engines. As you can see, though, I'm still staying with the small block Ford. I upgraded the suspension into more of the stuff that Carroll Shelby did to the original GT350s and built myself a hot street car, but it was still basically a modified version or an upgraded version of the original car. It's not to a resto mod yet. That's a level 3. We'll get to that next week. Like I said, I went in, and I learned about paint, did the paint work, did the interior work, and the level 2, just so you know what kind of tools are needed, this is just your basic tools, your sockets, your wrenches, your screwdrivers, your vice grips, the basic tools that you're going to need, as well as a few things like floor jacks and some extra tools. And you also just need to have basic skills in paint and suspension and body and motor workings, electrical, those kind of things. And if you don't have those skills, this is the place to learn them. So this is the kind of project, as you take a vehicle apart, you're replacing it with newer parts that kind of go back in the same place, and you're learning about the geometry of suspension. You're learning about how to do paint and body work, without having to do a bunch of rusty metal replacement. Those are tougher projects that we'll deal with later. A lot of people, this is where, like I said before, this is kind of where they live. This is a great project. It can involve everything from just, using something that's patinaed paint to something that you do complete restoration as far as paint, body, interior, motor, suspension. Okay, let's say that you want to take the small block Chevy out of your Camaro and put an LS engine in it. Or you want to put a Coyote into your Mustang. Or you want to put a modern Hemi into your old Challenger. That's a level 3. We're not going to deal with that today. In the meantime, we're going to take a break. We're going to come back with some of your questions. You know, one question I get asked a lot is, what is a great first project for somebody? And my answer is always the same: an old truck. For several reasons. First of all, they're cheap, they're easier to find. It's okay if you drive them around all beat up. And there's great sources for parts from like LMC. They carry all kinds of stuff, whether you're doing a custom build, if you're doing an original build, if you're doing a full-on hot rod thing, you can find stuff in their catalog. So getting parts is not that hard. And they really support the truck life, which is, if you've never been into the truck world, as you start to dig into the truck life, you'll see that it's kind of represents Americana. So if you need parts, man, LMC is the place to go. We have a question from Jacob. Jacob says, hey, I've been a fan of the show and the project for a long time. I've got a 90 Chevy 1500 4x4 Suburban. It's got a 350 in it, 700 R4 transmission, 241 transfer case, 10 bolt front and rear axles. Said he bought it in California when he was stationed at Camp Pendleton, and now it's in Virginia. Now, he says he's been shooting around the idea of starting to do a transmission swap and put in a modern 6-speed manual transmission. And he says that he's talked to American Powertrain, and he sent them what kind of vehicle that he's doing, and he said they only do stuff for a 2-wheel drive truck. Do I have any advice? Yeah, Jacob, I do. First of all, that's a really cool idea. It's a cool project. Unfortunately, you are jumping into one of the most advanced projects out there. I don't know what your mechanical background is, so let me just kind of walk you through what you're looking at. And for those of you that are just new to this, he's basically wanting to take an automatic out and put in a stick. It's a lot easier to go the other direction. So let's just kind of talk through kind of what you're looking at, and then I'll get to your transmission issue here in a second. First of all, I assume you have a column shift on this truck. So you're going to have to do something with the column. You're going to have to just, pull the column shift off, unhook it or whatever, something to make it look good. So that's something you're going to have to deal with. Then you're going to have to get the proper pedals, because you got to have a clutch pedal. Fortunately for you, 90 Chevy, Suburban would have the same pedals that a pickup would have. So you're going to have to go to a salvage yard and find the 4-speed pedals, the clutch and brake pedal that would be in that year model pickup. You might be able to find it at a place like LMC Truck. I know they carry some of that stuff. So check them out. You might be able to buy it new. And somebody like American Powertrain might have pedals as well. So that'll take care of the pedal deal, so you're moving forward with that. Now, the transmission. Basically, there's 2 types of transmissions that go into a 4-wheel drive. They have what is called a married transfer case and a divorce transfer case. And you're going to find in the car world, everything's a little bit sexual. It just is. I mean, have you ever looked at your plugs and wondered why one's called a male and female? It's because the male one goes inside of the female one. It's true. It's what it is. So what we're talking about here, a divorced transfer case is separate from the transmission, like a lot of the military vehicles use. And then a married transfer case is actually bolted to the back of the transmission, and it becomes kind of one unit, like a marriage. And so what happens is that sort of transmission for a married setup has a special flange on the back. And American Powertrain does not offer those special transmissions that are set up for an automatic shift transmission to bolt a transfer case to. I don't know of anybody that supplies Tremix that way. First of all, you have to make the choice. Are you going to use a divorced transfer case or a married style? The easier type is to find a married style. Divorce style, you will need to mount the transfer case separate from the transmission. It will have a little drive shaft that will connect it to the transmission. Then you will have your main drive shaft that will come out of the transfer case. If you ever crawled up underneath like an M37 military vehicle, you'll see what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a divorce transfer case. All right, so what do? Can't find a Tremec. Fortunately, there's a company out there that I have worked with for years called Advanced Adapters. They specialize in this kind of stuff. Now, they don't have Tremec transmissions, but they do have the NV 4500 5-speed that came in the Dodge trucks and some of the other trucks back a few years ago. And you can get a combination that will go behind a Chevy motor or a Ford motor or a Dodge motor that will have a married NV 4500 5-speed, which is a tough transmission. I wouldn't use your stock transfer case. I would get one of their Atlas transfer cases, so you just get the whole combination. They sell it like that. It's another thing. You're going to have to build your cross member, and then you're going to have to get special drive shafts front and rear because your stockers aren't going to work. That would be the best way to put a standard shift transmission into your project. It's a lot of work, but it's worth it. If you want to know a little bit more about transmission things, we have a whole series that's on Amazon Prime now called the Stacey David Restoration Series. And we have a whole show just on transmission options and how to lay things out. If you guys want to see more about this kind of thing, or you want to see me do one of these kind of projects, just let us know and we'll do it and put it on the Restoration Series. Okay, this question comes from Ben. He says, can you advise me where to find parts or direct me as to where I can find the information on how to rebuild the following? I have a 52 Chevy pickup truck, 6-cylinder, 3-speed transmission on the column. The shift lever steering column is all worn out, not shifting right, and it gets stuck between first and second gears. Where do I go for parts or instructions on how to rebuild the entire assembly? Well, Ben, as far as instructions, you're in trouble. You're just going to have to figure this one out. As far as parts, LMC Truck, I can almost guarantee you, is going to have what you need. That's right down their wheelhouse. They have that body style. They supply a lot of parts for that. Now, here's my suggestion to you. Do you really want to keep that column shift? I have converted so many of those over the years just because they're a hassle. And some of these parts might not be available. Some of these bushings and some of these things once they start to wear. Rebuilding them, you might have to get in there and fabricate and build and weld and make some pieces. So I would suggest, if you can't find the parts, if it's a simple bolt-in thing and you can get the parts at LMC, good. Go ahead and fix it and you're good to go. If not, I would seriously consider getting a 3-speed shifter that goes on the floor and converting it to a floor shift. And I believe LMC even carries that universal shifter. If not, you know, Hurst does. Several companies have that floor-mounted 3-speed shifter. So hopefully this helps you out. Good luck to you on the project and enjoy shifting that thing. All right, another question that I've got here. The guy is asking, he says, how do you prevent a project from running away with you? And man, that is a really good question because it's an issue that comes up all the time. It's probably the most prevalent problem that people have when they go to build or restore a car. And it's getting worse now because there's so many great products out there. You know, how do you keep that from happening? Well, first of all, let's look at how it does happen. Let's say you want to do your suspension on your vehicle and you go to someplace like Fat Man's or TCI or Heights or Ride Tech or somebody like that. If you'll go into their catalog, you'll notice they'll have like a budget suspension, which is usually something that you put together and weld up yourself, and it's very reasonable and generally uses stock style suspension components. Then the next step up, they'll have a complete cross member. Once again, still utilizing stock brake components and stock upper and lower control arms. Then the next step, you'll go up, then they'll have, you know, fabricated control arms, and the next step up will be polished stainless steel control arms, and then you can step up to coilover shocks, and then you might as well get rid of those stock brakes and add some Wilwood brakes or Bear brakes, and pretty soon you went there looking to spend $1,000, and now the price tag is $6,000. And that's really easy to happen because most car guys will get in there and they'll look at that and they'll go, well, it's just a few dollars more. You know, who's watching? Who knows? Guys, let me tell you something. Your budget is always watching. So you really have to exercise some restraint here when you're going into a project. You have to be realistic on how you want to build it. Then when you have the money, if you've budgeted it, then you can go ahead and do it. Let me give you an example. This is one of the first times I was building an engine myself. I was back in high school or whatever, and I was working on a 65 Mustang, you know, and I was getting into some street racing and some other stuff. And so I wanted a fast car, you know, I wanted the fastest car in the neighborhood. So I started pulling the motor apart and started talking to some of my car buddies and the people down at the speed shops. And I was getting some good advice and I was getting some bad advice. So you got to be careful who you listen to too. But I went down to Super Shops, which is the speed shop at the time, and I was going to get a cam and some valve train components. And I noticed that when you go to buy a cam, you know, because it was just a flat tappet cam, a cam that would give you 50 horsepower and a cam that would give you 150 horsepower were pretty much the same price, because they were just a cam. And so I was like, well, you know, I'm going to take a cam that's going to give me 150 horsepower. And nobody told me that to get that kind of power out of that cam, you're going to have to upgrade your valve train. You need roller rockers. You need better heads. You know, you need headers. You need all kinds of stuff. You need a better ignition system. Just because I bought that cam cost me another $4,000 or $5,000 to get the benefit out of that part that I was paying for. And of course I learned that the hard way, and that's why we try to tell guys, it's like, listen, you need to look down the road on how all these parts are going to go together, and if you really want to get the best benefit out of them, you need to add them all together, and that becomes expensive. So you need to kind of walk down that road with your planning book or whatever beforehand, and then you can kind of have a nice path on the way you want to take it. That's the only way to keep a project from running away with you. You know, one question I get a lot these days is, where do you go to find quality tools? And that's a legitimate question, because you used to be able to go down and buy them at the hardware store, but you can't anymore. But a great solution is somebody like Cornwell Tools. Not only are they America's oldest tool company, they've been in business 100 years, man, so they know what they're doing. It's the top level tools, but they also deliver right to your door. So all you have to do is get on their website, find out where a dealer is near you, and the guy will show up. You know, you can have him show up weekly, daily, monthly, whatever, and he will take care of your tool needs. So if you're looking for quality tools, the best in the business, check out Cornwell. You won't be disappointed. So you've probably heard the big news today. The Bullitt Mustang, Steve McQueen's old car, sold for $3.4 million. $3.4 million for a '68 Mustang. That's awesome. Listen, if you can get that, that's great. That car, I've been kind of following the whereabouts of that car for a few decades now. The owner, the guy that had it for so many years, was right here in Tennessee, and he would not bring the car out. He would not let anybody look at it, but he had it, and it finally surfaced last year. And people were really expecting this auction to go crazy. I don't think they expected it to go quite that crazy. But of course now everybody thinks that any '67, '68 Mustang is worth a fortune, because the mentality, of course, is, if Steve McQueen's car is worth $3.4 million, well, obviously mine's worth at least $1 million. Sorry guys, it doesn't work that way. Actually, that's a good thing that we need to discuss on one of these podcasts, is how that auction world is affecting the car world and giving people misconceptions about what things are worth. And we'll get into that on another time. But that's great. The Bullitt Mustang is out. If you get a chance to go see it, check it out. It's just an old ratty Mustang, but it is Steve's old car, and that's pretty cool. For those of you that are music fans and listen to your music out in the shop, and if you've heard of a band called Rush, well, you know that Neil Peart, the drummer of Rush, has passed away. If you are not familiar with Neil Peart, you've got to Google him and check out some videos. Considered to be probably one of the greatest drummers of all time, if not the greatest rock drummer. Of course, there's Mick Fleetwood would probably have an issue with that, and I'm sure Buddy Rich would say he's not the best drummer ever. Neil Peart, he was renowned for his drum solos that would last forever. His stamina, his speed, his technical prowess. You know, even if you're not a drummer, you can't watch this guy and not go, wow, there's just something unique about him. He kind of invented the drum solo in the way that it became known as this long, you know, the rest of the band walks off stage and Neil Peart does a solo. Anyway, it's a huge loss for the music industry. The best way to celebrate that, guys, is go out and check out some of their music and check them out on YouTube. You will not be disappointed. Keep in mind, this podcast is made possible by our friends at LMC Truck and our friends at Cornwell Tools. All right, that wraps it up for us today. It is time for you to get out there, start working on something, build something with your own two hands, send in your questions, send in your pictures, let us know what you're working on. All right, we'll see you later.